Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to the very first episode of Loading, Please Wait. It's our brand new show where we discuss many different Pantheon Rise of the Fallen subjects. Today we'll be discussing tanks, so stay tuned. All right, thanks guys for joining us for our very first episode of Loading, Please Wait. And today we're going to be talking about warriors, paladins, and dire lords in our tank segment. And I have with me Vandrad and Kino Monster. Both are pledgers and members of the community that have been around for a while. So if I could, I'll just have Vandrad talk about himself a little bit.
Hello there. I'm Vandrad. I'm an older gamer. I started the MMO scene back in the Meridian 59 and Ultima Online days, and progressed through EQ1, EQ2, Anarchy Online, Star Wars Galaxies, Eve Online. I mean, Dark Ages of Camelot was in there too at one point. I've pretty much played every single MMO that's probably ever been released. And I'm now waiting for yet another one.
And then our other guy, Kino Monster. Why don't you give it an introduction?
Greetings, y'all. I should have said hail. That would have been better. I'm kind of the opposite of Van. I turned 39 a couple weeks ago. I can't believe it's been 20 years since EQ. But really, that game ruined MMOs for me. And I've played WoW and some like Anarchy Online and Age of Conan. I've never really bitten off a big chunk of any MMO since that game. As people who know me online on the forums probably associate me with being one of those really hardcore EQ guys. So I both embrace that and apologize for that. But my background's really just hardcore EQ. Emus, launch through Velius. Really looking forward to Pantheon. I can't describe how excited I am for a game that is going to recapture, hopefully, that EverQuest magic.
Right on, man. So why I picked these guys to do the show with me is because we all have that EQ background, and reading through the forums, and I've also picked out stuff that they posted where it kind of fit my kind of thinking. We not necessarily have the same opinion on every subject, but basically outspoken and ready to kind of cut to the bone with certain topics. And so let's kick into our topics, and that's tanks. So first off, the warrior. And the warrior, we'll talk about resources, and they use battle points and the resilience for mitigation. And so I'll go to Kino here. What do you think of those resources?
I think it's interesting that we might be seeing two types of resources. I've told you guys before, I'm not a super fan of the builder spender mechanic, but I'm afraid that's just one of those things that an old stick in the mud EQ vet needs to get over. But how is it going to play out to either have to generate or spend for both offense and defense is intriguing to me.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just hoping that it's not like, they make resilience a thing where it's either you have to pay attention to it nonstop all the time, or it's just going to be oblivious and you don't watch it at all. What do you think, Van?
Well, looking at the description, it says it's not a resource that the warrior spends. Rather, they just work to keep it as high as possible during combat. So for me, that reads as a semi-passive resource that you just kind of have to keep an eye on, rather than a continual monitoring and making adjustments either by activating abilities or doing something else. It's kind of an aside. Pay attention to it, see how it changes, make some adjustments.
Well, since that all factors in to the mitigation, do you guys think that warriors are going to have to be the MT? Like, I see all these posts on the forums, and everyone's like, oh, warrior MT, and they're going to have the best mitigation, and it all comes back to their armor, their shields, their resilience. What do you guys think about that?
Well, yeah, okay, but main tank in what in what regard are we talking? Because again, we're looking at potentially two different types of content. You've got your group level content and you've got your raid content. And if you look back at the very early days of Pantheon, when this was first announced, Brad and some of the other developers made a huge point about this quaternary approach. You've got four archetypes, and each of the classes within their archetype will perform the primary function equally well, but by different means. So if you look at the group level content, you should not need to pick a warrior over a paladin over a dire lord for that level content. Any of them will work. They'll just accomplish that goal slightly differently.
Yeah, we were just riffing on this a little bit before we started recording, and it's interesting because how do you define what you want your tank to be? And that's going to be defined by the content. Are you duoing with a cleric? Are you in a full group doing an EXP camp? Are you in a raid with 4 or 6 or 8 other groups? And I have this bad habit of referencing EQ, so please forgive me. I've got a buddy who makes fun of me. It's a meme almost, like in EQ with air quotes. And I know this is not EQ, but in EQ we would see, the Warriors did the most DPS, so they kind of had the best offense is a good defense, in addition to obviously taunt and armor class. But they weren't the best aggro holders. When S hit the fan, your mez broke or you got an ad or whatnot, you wanted a paladin or a shadow knight there to save your enchanter. So is a 3% more EXP per hour for the group with a warrior doing DPS and tanking better than the risk of the enchanter dying? So they're doing the same content but doing it in different ways, and I really hope we see that again, and not just like sliding dials up and down to make them all equal. I'd really love to see them play different.
Right, where like if you have one warrior, it almost seems like in a raid, for example, you'd have to have another one so you could take advantage of when they can lock shields or whatever and kind of jerk each other off and mitigate all the damage.
That's a great example, and I think it was, again, a downfall or a negative of EverQuest is in certain situations you only needed 1 or 2 of a class. And so then if you had multiples of them, did you sit them out or ask them to bring an alt or just be a little bit less than? So it's good to see these. I haven't seen them in play. I'm not in pre-alpha. But it's good to see these mechanics where there might actually be some synergy between the same class, So if you have 3 warriors, that might be okay, even though only one of them is doing the main tanking, because the other 2 can enhance that other warrior. I think that's really important to make people feel like they matter.
Well, look back at a lot of the EQ1 content, and it was the entire raid against one target. So yeah, you really only did need one warrior and maybe a backup warrior in case, again, you miss a complete heal or something goes wrong, he can step in. You had some of those targets, that you needed a rampage tank for, and Paladin or Shadow Knight, could work pretty well for those. It wasn't until you got into content where you had to deal with 4, 5, 6 mobs at a time because they were not mezzable or were you couldn't use any forms of crowd control whatsoever, that you then started to need additional warriors. Or even again, you still only needed more paladins or shadow knights. You only ever needed 2 warriors.
Yeah, and in some of those situations, like I think Luckland was really where they ramped up the actual encounter instead of just the spank and tank, where you'd get ads throughout the fight and there were different mechanics. Because of their snap aggro, those classes were, the Paladin and Shadow Knight were maybe even better than a warrior in that situation. So I hope that it's hard to balance to say that I hope that they're equal but different.
Well, I guess we're going to have to define, what is going to be the primary role of the tank class. The assumption would be is that its job is to force whatever mob is in front of them to focus on that person, and it will allow everybody else to do their job, to the greatest effectiveness. So how will they accomplish that? And so long as they do it equally well, doesn't really matter the method.
Well, I think, like, just looking at, if we jump into the abilities here, one, I think the warrior class plays a lot like the World of Warcraft warrior, and they have the charges, the jumps, and then the banners, which are kind of like shouts to me, and that'll really add the utility, and that's where the utility comes from. And I think that people will want to wear if they're melee for sure because of their banner. Their DPS banner is crazy good. And if you look at like casters, I don't know what, if you have a caster group, I don't know what a warrior really brings for them. But will the DPS utility that a warrior brings for everyone else in the group kind of amp up their own DPS? Will it, how will they scale warrior DPS versus paladin DPS versus dire lord DPS? When everyone right now is talking about, oh, dire lord's going to be so great, but warrior utility buffs seem like they kind of outshine the other two as far as raw damage.
I think you made a good point early on there that mobility is really key. You mentioned WoW. People would sometimes ask, hey, what's the best, what do they call it, enchantment to get on my... And the answer is always run speed. And people would say, why run speed? Well, when 40 people can get to a mob 3% faster, that's way more important than 12 agility on your boot. So will warriors have some higher effective DPS and therefore higher effective aggro? Will they be able to get to mobs who are coming at your enchanter or your cleric more quickly than your SK or your paladin, and therefore be balanced in a different way? I think that's a really interesting thought.
Well, if you start looking at the warrior build, especially their banners, you're talking about some abilities that modify or enhance the entire group. So it brings the group up a slight level. You then contrast that to the Dire Lord, and all of their blood states or their stances are self only. So it literally makes them better, but has almost no effect on anybody else in the group.
What do you guys think? So let's jump into just breaking down this ability, Angering Blow. And this is from tooltip from a couple different streams. But it says, strike the armor, provoking manner, making them angry for 30 seconds. While angry, your attacks will generate additional hate. That's one of them. And they have another similar one. And I'm just curious, does that seem like enough threat? Is that doing enough for your aggro generation? Does that feel like you're going to do your job kind of thing?
I think it all comes down to balance. Like we were talking about this before, there's probably going to be some algorithm and it's going to determine how effective this is, some coefficient.
Right.
Well, so Angering Blow has a 30-second duration. It says while angry, your attacks generate additional hate. So the question I have to ask then is, what if you aren't using Angering Blow? How different is your ability to generate hate if you don't use it? Is it an absolutely required, ability? And if it does last for 30 seconds, why is the cooldown only 10 seconds?
Well, what happens here if the mob parries it or dodges it? Are you just screwed?
Or is it actually a melee? Yeah, it is. Okay, it's a melee attack. Yeah. So again, if they dodge, parry, repost, whatever, does the anger effect and the additional hate generation apply, or does it not?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's almost like a D&D, like you make a ranged spell attack. You actually have to freaking roll your dice to see if your spell is accurate enough to hit. Do you get the provoking manner, making them angry, if you miss your strike? maybe that's why it has a 10-second cooldown. That's interesting.
That could be it.
Food,
Yeah.
Food for thought on that.
So you now take this from group level content and move it into raid level content when you're typically going to be dealing with mobs that are 3, 4, 5, 6 levels higher than you. Deep red cons. You typically are dealing with things where mob has really high armor class, really high defensive abilities, really high mitigation. A lot of these melee attacks, which generate hate, would not be landing normally. So
Right.
you might want to be looking at a class that can generate hate that doesn't take into account the opponent's armor class and defensive capabilities.
Via a spell or something like that. It also might make sense to, if warriors hypothetically end up, if there is a main tank mechanic that boils down to the warrior, and there may or may not be, maybe it goes back to what we were talking about before, how multiple warriors would then be more necessary. My angering blow was missed. Somebody else needs to start building up some hate so that when our main tank dies or loses their defensive stance or whatever, that next person's ready in line.
Well, here's another thing to think about. If your angering blow misses and another warrior's hits and it gets the debuff that he's angry, will that affect all the other warriors' abilities or only that one specific warrior?
Oh, so would it act as a buff then, or just generate additional hate for that warrior?
Right. Yeah. Is that's a weird way to code it, I guess, because it's going to have a debuff and it would have to be, if it wasn't only your attacks, then it could, if there's other warriors in the raid that are trying to do as much damage and stuff, then maybe all of a sudden they start climbing threat. Uh-oh.
And yeah, the mob spins and does, an AoE repost and half the raid dies.
I would assume the way it's written that it's just for the individual, but it's an interesting concept to think about. If you have 2 people doing it or 3 or 4 and you get some resists or misses in this case, those people have to be. Additionally, there's like a level of competency required here where if there is DPS gear or whatnot, or if you're under geared as a warrior in a raid, don't be hitting your angering blow, right?
Exactly.
There's a skill level in play here.
And what we dealt with.
Sorry, the Goonies, the "Hey you guys" kind of. That's what I imagine a bunch of warriors doing.
So back in a lot of the EQ1 content, you had your rampage tank set up. He always attacked second, before the rest of the raid because you wanted him on that rampage list. So if the main tank died, he would transfer over, to be, the prime target of whatever mob you're fighting. So you may want to be thinking about the same thing here where you've got your second warrior who is still using angering blow, but not as frequently as your main tank. So that if your main tank goes down, your second main tank has already developed a level of hate just below the main and can step in and take over that role.
Yeah, I bet that's likely going to be a thing, a form of rotation.
Right.
There is one other ability I want to talk about, and it works in a threat, since we're talking about threat, and that's Strike of Breaking, and it breaks the target's armor, reducing their armor class by 5% and generating hate every second for 30 seconds, and this effect can stack up to 5 times, increasing the amount of hate generated per second with each attack. So it makes me think of WoW, and it makes me think of Sunder Armor, because you're like, spamming that, getting your stacks up, getting more threat, and then once you're getting more threat, then you're popping, Angering Blow, and it's just kind of it's a stacking threat, kind of similar to Dire Lord, where they have their, their threat over time, but their threat over time is a passive thing versus this warrior ability, which is more active.
So my first thought on this harkens back to what you said about Angering Blow affecting one or all. It says it can stack up to 5 times, but it has a 10-second cooldown and lasts for 30 seconds. So how are you going to stack 5 times? Am I missing something?
I bet the debuff refreshes on application.
Actually, I bet that you apply Strike of Breaking, and each time you hit after that, it will then apply it again, so that the next 5 attacks will then get the increased hate, and then after that it stops. It will not increase further. But that 5th level will last for the duration of those 30 seconds.
See, in my mind, it's you hit it, and then when 10 seconds are up, you hit it again, and then it adds the second application. In 10 seconds again, you do it, and you have that 30-second window to stack it as high as you can before it falls off, and you just have to keep refreshing it as often as possible.
It's rolling. It's a rolling debuff. That makes sense.
Yeah, that's how I read it.
But if it only lasts 30 seconds, you have a 10-second cooldown, you'll only ever get 3 of them going in 30 seconds.
But the 30-second cooldown will restart every time you hit it.
Yeah, the application resets.
Right. Okay.
So you have one stack at 30 seconds, and then you hit refresh it, you get 2 stacks. That bumps it back up to 30 seconds again.
Roger that.
All right. Well, let's jump into the Paladin. Paladin is most likely what I'm going to roll just because of the utility of the class. But let's start with resources, and they use Wrath and they use Reckoning points. So it's interesting that they didn't go the mana route. It's kind of astray a little bit from what everyone's used to in all the other MMOs with Paladins and the way their hybrid system have worked in the past. But I think it's a good change. What do you guys think?
I do miss the hybrid system. I think it also is likely a good change, and I just need to come to terms with that. Wrath is the one that, reading the tooltip, confuses me a little bit. First of all, and I'm going to be that guy. Okay, the UI graphic is going to be a row of 3 suns. Okay, how is that different than battle points or monk gates? Just the same thing with a different name. Okay, rant over. It says they fill one at a time as they are accumulated during combat. How are they accumulated during combat? Wrath,
different abilities.
Wrath says they take damage from enemies. You generate wrath. How do reckoning points are going to be entirely based on using abilities to generate reckoning points?
Correct.
Well, some abilities will spend reckoning points, other ones will gain it. So, like Arcing Light, which heals yourself for a small amount, and then that heal jumps to other members in the group, that will grant 1 reckoning point.
So again, we have 2 generators and 2 spenders.
Pretty much.
It's very interesting how they're breaking what was effectively mana apart into, you're now going to have 4 bars, as it were. Like your hit points, your stamina, and your mana are now going to be hit point, stamina, and then X and Y generator and spender. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think it's a little try hard. Like I said before, they're just changing the icon and renaming the resource generator and spender, but maybe it's fun. I don't know.
I'm sure it's, their goal is to give some class flavor, a little bit of lore into it or something to, change it. As far as Wrath, I mean, it's supposed to be, in my mind, their retribution. These paladins are now, they were clerics and they're picking up the hammer to get the retribution, and so now they have Wrath, and that's why the resource is that.
Makes sense.
It feels again a little bit like the mechanic of the WoW warrior, taking and dealing damage, using your resources and taking damage to build up rage.
Right. I mean, you could have just had Wrath still equal mana, and as a paladin gets hit, it fills up its mana. I think it's just a different naming convention to make it fit with the mechanic of taking damage, and this pool then refills.
I bet some of that is probably so you don't have to med. You don't have to sit down and meditate to get so you can start tanking. Because what if you end the fight and you're low, low Wrath, or if it was mana, then you're just gotta sit here and regen, guys.
That's a great point. that I had not considered. I really like that.
Because the assumption would be that it would not decrease from non-use. So once you have it, it doesn't really go away if you're not really doing anything. But would it then, if you end a fight and your wrath is low, you also then wouldn't regenerate it unless you're already, stepping immediately into combat, because you're only filling it when you're taking damage.
That's kind of cool because it leads to things like, skilled players who know their pulls and their zones and have a good group are going to be able to play around that, right? Like, hey, we've got 2 paladins in the group, let's keep their wrath up.
Or, if you think of the WoW warrior, for example, how they're grinding, leveling up, a lot of the strat there is to kill a mob, and as you're killing it, start pooling your rage. So then when you get to the next one, you can dump rage and then start pooling again, and so on and so forth, which would be the same thing if there's no decay for wrath.
I mean, even in raiding and WoW, like, drink every time you hear somebody say, this is a rage mob, right? The warriors are going to go out there, they're going to build up their rage so that when you pull Anixia or whatever, they're going to be full rage. Yeah.
The only downside I see to having wrath requiring the paladin to take damage is that if you're in a group where you are only dealing with one mob at a time and you happen to have 2 tanks, if the paladin is not the main tank, it will never regenerate wrath. And therefore, half of its abilities it won't be able to use because it's not going to be refilling that resource pool.
Hey, this is a sunshine pumping blog. We don't call out legitimate concerns like that.
Well, I'm pretty sure there's some
bad.
abilities that generate wrath, because otherwise you'd be at a standstill, you know what I mean? I think you're looking at, I hate taking it back to WoW every time, but like a warrior soloing is taking damage and also doing damage, and so he's getting 2 sides of that rage build. But then when a warrior is just doing DPS, he's not taking damage, so he's not getting the resource in from the damage component of the rage build.
It looks like there are at least 2 or 3, at least on paper, ways to generate wrath, but the very first one says
does it.
Yeah, as they take damage is the first one, and also there's a modifier when they kill an enemy to give them. It's still a good point because you're going to have a greater than, less than here. Like, if your main tank is the paladin, another paladin or a warrior or something like that, you're probably going to be doing less damage simply because you aren't generating as much wrath.
Yep, I totally agree. And this kind of also boils into the limited action system in the set. So how many builders do you need to have? Are you getting enough in where you don't have to sacrifice another hotkey to another builder, where you could just have a spender there?
Yep, that's a good point. That also reminds me of, they won't admit it, but this game is also being designed for some anti-boxing. Right? So when we see these classes that have not necessarily sophisticated or complex, but they require another level or 2. There's another layer to your generators and spenders. It's going to be harder to dual box a paladin or a warrior when you have to micromanage 2 different resources like that. And then that may be a poor segue off of what you just said, but I think it's similar. Yeah, you might have to make some sacrifices in terms of what your quote-unquote loadout is going to be.
For sure.
I don't know. See, I disagree with the 2-boxing issue. I don't think that the gameplay is going to be so complex that you cannot effectively 2-box, because your main focus for if you're multi-boxing is going to be whatever your tank is doing. Every subsequent class that you have should be one that requires it requires less full-time attention throughout a fight. I really doubt that a wizards, is going to require an excessive amount of paying attention every 2 or 3 seconds. Whereas, you could just, click a few buttons, set up a couple hotkeys, maybe a few macros, and let it do its thing while you're focusing on, your main tank and, a few hotkeys from a cleric that's really just going to be healing your boxed tank. You're not going to be as efficient as a full group, of course, yes.
Yeah.
But I still think you'll see enough people out there multi-boxing 2, maybe 3, and doing fairly well in maybe beginning areas of a dungeon or in some areas that has less overall danger levels.
I agree. I do still think that it is in a manner, an anti-boxing mechanic. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to box 6 paladins. Just saying.
I mean, I'm going to do a box, absolutely, and it'll be a dire lord and a shaman.
Okay, so we talked about some warrior abilities. The paladin abilities, I think so far from all the abilities I've seen, they have the single most OP one button press in the game, and that's Golden Strike, which it does cost Wrath, it does cost 2 Reckoning points, but it's on a 20-second cooldown. It's instant. It's a melee swing, and you consolidate Celestial Light into your weapon as you strike, dealing divine damage and making you invulnerable to all damage for 3 seconds. And on top of that, you will regenerate 8% of your max health every second during this time.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, there are a lot of broken skills, I think, going around right now. People talking about the Dire Lord's 33% heal every 20 or 10 seconds. Balance changes are coming. I do sure hope we're early on in this process.
Do you think, though, they'll just nix that ability?
No. I think what they'll do is they'll change the cooldown timer.
We also see a lot of spells, or abilities rather, that don't have a casting time, and maybe that is a direct correlation to what Van was saying earlier about how they don't have mana anymore. They just have your pips. So when you spend one of those, it doesn't have a cast time. Like, that kind of makes sense. But a way to balance some of these things would, yes, be obviously by using those sliders, turning the damage down, the healing down, the cooldown up, and maybe adding a component where you actually have to have a cast. I think, Fragile, you were the one who posted on the Paladin forums about cast times and how that can affect, so far as we know, only one of the tank classes.
Right, yep. Yeah, it can definitely affect mitigation, because that comes back to the core, how their combat system's built. Can you dodge, parry, block while you're casting? Is that a thing? Do you take max damage when you're casting and mobs are hitting you? Because then you look at the other 2 classes, Warrior, Dire Lord, they don't have those cast times. What the hell?
Even from a DPS perspective, you take off, if a fight lasts 30 seconds and you use 4 abilities that take 1.5 seconds, that's 6 seconds. That's 20% of the time. I hope I did that arithmetic right. That you weren't, and people will look at the ability individually and say, "Oh, it's only 1.5 seconds," but yeah, that's going to add up real quick to your DPS, and DPS is part of your threat, which is part of your mitigation.
Yeah, it's like, are you still auto attacking when you're casting, or does that stop too?
Right.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what that was the question I was trying to ask right there.
Yeah, but we're not sure on the casting time thing. That'll play out. I'm sure I'll have to bug report that all the time during alpha beta. But the other flip side of that is their AEs are crazy.
Yeah, this class seems just singularly focused on AE abilities.
AE threat, Wrathful Aegis, radiate celestial flames, burn all enemies within 8 meters, generates additional hate every second. Then they have Fire Aegis. You send a wall of celestial flame out, purging you, poison, disease, which is an amazing utility by itself. And then it also stuns everything within 6 meters. So what?
Well, so you bring up the stuns. You've got all these AE abilities, and most of them have a stun component.
This is why I'm going to 6-box Paladins, because I can just chain stun area affect every mob within 10 meters.
Better get your macro quest ready.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
I have never heard of that.
Wink, wink. Okay. We talked about the warrior aggro, and they have their angry state, and they're stacking hate. Paladin doesn't really. They don't have stances, and they have basically one ability, two abilities that give bonus threat. It seems like they're missing something for like a modifier for threat.
Well, Insight says that it forces your enemy to attack you.
Right, that's their taunt, right?
Yeah, can we define forces? Can it miss, be resisted?
I'm assuming it'll be unresistible taunt. Kind of, the warrior has a similar ability. I'm assuming that it'll also move you to the top of the hate list. But who knows without seeing it.
I think that the primary hate generation from the Paladin is going to be from the stun components.
Now, also, like pommel and crosses, they're like you have a chance to stun your main target, and then you do a wide arc with your sword melee attack. So that's like a physical attack with a stun and not a casted spell stun. So will that still generate, will stuns in general generate bonus threat? And will melee stuns generate different threat than a casted stun?
Okay, so the attack would also... You would assume that the attack would also have a damage component to it as well.
Right, so you're going to attack and then swing. So yeah, you're assuming you're maybe hitting it 2 times, or maybe the initial stun has no damage, it's just a potential chance to.
And given it's an instant cast with a 1-second cooldown, you could just go click, 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 click.
Well, it does cost 40 wrath.
It does, right? It does. But I think depending upon how much wrath you have, and if the stun components do generate a lot more hate, it could be that snap aggro that the Paladin gets from having that ability.
EQ style.
Yeah, right. Yep. Main tank goes down, somebody else dies, whatever. Mob turns on the cleric. Boom. Pommel and cross, couple quick times. Mob spins around, back on the Paladin.
I think, again, there's going to be a coefficient at play here. Like, would you rather do 100 damage to a mob, or would you rather have it apply a stun, or would you rather have it apply a negative 15 armor class or strength debuff on the mob? Which one of those is going to be more effective? Because obviously the numbers are all different. So which one has a higher coefficient?
Right.
I think it's going to depend upon what you need in that period of time. So does the cleric need to get off a quick heal to stop somebody from dying? The stun would be a better application, because it's going to stop that NPC from attacking for a certain period of time. It could also allow somebody to get out of melee range, or, some other things could happen where just applying damage, the NPC is still doing the things that it was doing before. It's not really putting everything on a short pause.
Yep.
I, for one, am a fan of two-hand tanking, and I'm not a big sword and board person. And I don't have the ability pulled up. It's on the website. I don't have a tooltip from it. But it was like, you basically, if you have a shield equipped, you can block the next attack, or increases your chance to block. And if you have a two-handed equipped, it increases your parry chance. And to me, that adds so much more like playability and a little bit, more fun to the class. Because if you look at the warrior stuff, it's like you wear a shield, you wear a shield, you wear a shield. Everything uses a shield, shield bash, all that stuff. But Paladin, they have all these like AE attacks, they have spells, and nothing specifically says, hey, put a shield on.
Yeah, I think, and people can feel free to correct me in the comments or on the forums or whatnot, but even in the history of video gaming, and I'm 39, sword and board's always like the redheaded stepchild. In D&D, in Dragon Age Origins, although there were some good builds, even Paladins and Shadow Knights, if they were tanking and it was important, sure, you throw your shield on.
Yep.
Otherwise, they were two-handing it all the time. Like the DPS, making something dead is better for your overall defense and your healing and your cleric's mana than taking a little bit less damage, maybe wearing a shield. I'd like to see some offensive abilities, some utility abilities, or some real strong defensive abilities that offset that. Otherwise, we're just going to see another video game with a meta where nobody wears a shield because you can't kill anything.
Yeah, time to kill is going to be way too long. And you're right. If you're in that type of group that likes to play on the edge of, if anything goes wrong, we are going to die, then you want that thing that is going to kill it faster. And if that proves to be dual wielding or using a big two-hander, that's
People
what
are
you're going
gonna
to
do
go
it.
with. Yeah,
People are
that's
gonna do that,
exactly
yeah.
what you're going to go with.
Yeah, I mean, in Dire Lord, they're two-hand or dual wield. They can't even wear a shield, as far as we know. So it's like, if they can do it, why not a paladin? And then it makes me look at the warrior and wonder, like, are they getting the short end of the stick?
That is a nice segue into the Dire Lord.
All right.
Even before you leave the paladin, having the ability to either use a shield and a one-handed weapon or a two-handed weapon just gives them more options as you're going through the levels to finding you can replace gear and not really gimp yourself. You could find that really good one-handed slash and a really good shield and still have a good amount of DPS and increased ability to tank. A couple levels later or 10 levels later, you find that really good two-handed weapon. It allows for a bit more varied gameplay, unlike the warrior that is stuck with, having that board on one arm.
Right.
I mean, like Shield Slam is a warrior like interrupt stun ability, requires a shield. Paladin can just cast a stun.
Yep. And it also generates bonus threat when the mob's angered too for warriors. So it's like even more reason to use that ability, have a shield, and be pigeonholed into that role.
I think it could be cool. I think we might be overboard with the pigeonholing. I doubt that we are. It's probably going to be that. It would be cool if shields were cool again.
Yeah, I get that.
I'd like
totally.
to see.
I want
I'd
the
like
flexibility.
To see, well, I just want to see shields made into an offensive weapon.
Shield of the Slain Unicorn, the worst weapon in EverQuest. Yeah.
Yeah.
I look at. I hate to bring up Lord of the Rings, but you look at the Uruk-hai, and the shape of their shields and the way they carried it. It was an offensive weapon more so than a defensive weapon. And it would be nice to see shields used more offensively, other than just, oh, I'm gonna try to slam you and give you a quick stun.
And before we hop on the Dire Lord here, we haven't even mentioned the healing paladins have and their other
crazy.
Utility.
Yeah, guess which class is going to be really good?
Paladin?
Could be.
It's like the best way I can think about Paladin and their healing components, unless they're scaled really low and they're not like that great to use, which would then be making a Paladin shitty, which is bad. But it makes me think of a lot of the group compositions where you're most likely going to want to bring like a shaman plus cleric, shaman plus druid, whatever. You have two healers, but with a Paladin tank, you could just bring the shaman and yourself, and then you can bring an extra DPS, and you can kill shit faster.
Yeah. That smells like an excellent meta to me.
Not to mention the fact that, if you're in an area that is dealing with lots of mobs that have AE abilities, having that paladin with that group heal that, works very well with the shaman's group heals, you can take on a lot of that, high AE damage content hopefully relatively easily, or at least easier than you would if you're forced to deal with single heal only priests and a tank that doesn't really have an ability to transfer heals to other group members.
Right. Like, that's a really good point about the shaman, because most of their healing kit, a lot of it is heal over times, where paladin healing is direct heal. So you might take those big bursts of damage, maybe an AE goes off or whatever. Paladin can do a direct group heal to help a little bit, and then the sustain comes in with the paladin heal over time. Or I'm sorry, the shaman heal over time. Just seems like that's a great duo. All while the shaman has slowed everything and everyone has haste and kumbayaing.
Synergy bros.
Yeah. Anyway, let's jump in the Dire Lord. They are our last tank class. They are relatively different compared to the other two classes. For one, they don't have plate, which I think everyone's overhyping that fact, but whatever. For resources, they use essence, and I think that's it, right?
Yep, that's it.
So that they're only tank that only has to manage one resource. But I would say the other resource is their own health.
Well, they do have to manage mana. So they, unlike the paladin and they've got that mana. So they still have two resources they have to deal with. But again, it's mana and essence.
I only see like one ability on the website, which I know is way out of date, that uses mana. Do you think, I know that as we've progressed through the pre-alphas, we've seen classes going from not even having their resources to having both mana and stamina and their resources to those bars like disappearing. Is it possible that mana just kind of disappears?
Well, I mean, looking at the abilities, I don't see anything that uses the mana.
Edge of Midnight costs 40 mana.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, it does. Weird. I wonder if that was a tooltip error.
It's possible.
I mean, it was pre-alpha, right?
That's true. This was from pre-alpha.
Yeah, my guess is that mana goes bye-bye.
So what do you guys think of their mitigation? I want to point out they have a tanking stance. They have blood stances. And their main threat generating stance has a flat damage reduction of 10% to all damage.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that they're going to be the quote-unquote worst at mitigation, and maybe that will play into some raid tanking when there's real bursty damage, and I could be wrong. But they're going to be the class that is the highest DPS of these three, and the highest survivability in terms of being able to regenerate health. They've got regen abilities, they've got heal abilities that are powerful and immediate, where the paladin is a little bit more focused on maybe mitigating through a stun or a group heal. The Dire Lord's going to be able to burst heal themselves while also making the time to kill of their group, or if they're solo, lower.
I agree. What do you think, Van?
Well, yeah. The Dire Lord is so different. A lot of its stuff is focused on itself, but yet it also has a few abilities that work very well with other priest classes. So whereas the warrior's mitigation is basically based on straight AC, and that one stance he's got, the Dire Lord has to use an ability which I think may make up for the fact that it's not wearing plate. So I think it's still going to have a harder time dealing with DPS. So its DPS profile, incoming profile, is going to be much spikier than the other ones. But
Yeah.
I think that's going to be offset by its own abilities to regenerate its own hit points, and the fact that it synergizes very well with other priests, affecting its abilities, the abilities, healing abilities that land on the Dire Lord.
They almost seem like a class that's designed to take more damage in a good way. I'm not sure if the Dire Mark ability is still a thing, but that's the one where you buff a group member, and whenever they take damage, you absorb, or rather you take some percentage. The class looks to be designed around taking more damage, but also then being able to get it back. And that seems really cool. It fits like the lore of this class tremendously.
Yeah, let's we're talking about get it back and everything, so let's go over that. That's their main one, looks like their bread and butter anyway, is Abyssal Strike, 15-second cooldown, vicious attack that ignores armor. So there's the damage we're talking about. That's going to be really hard hitting, because they're most likely I could see them using two-hand. Because if mobs at all riposte, then dual wield is going to end up taking more damage, which you probably don't want that to happen. But who am I to say? But anyway, ignores armor, deals damage, and it heals you for 25% of your max health.
Yeah, and that happens every 15
Every
seconds.
15 seconds.
If you have enough essence to do it.
Yeah, how quickly can you generate 40 essence? Are you giving up other things? Like, would you rather be doing DPS with your essence instead of having to spend it? But yeah, on the surface, this looks absurd. This is great.
I see that as a kind of like a quick get out of jail free card, where it's that, oh shit, it's all hitting the fan, and you can pop that a few times to regenerate your health when you absolutely need it, rather than something that you would use constantly throughout a fight.
Yeah, this kind of screams like off tank ability. Like, you need to stay alive for the next 30 seconds. I mean, EverQuest monks drink. I said EverQuest. They had Mend, which healed 25% of their hit points, albeit for free, every 6 minutes. 6 minutes.
Yeah. Well, and then the next ability there is Thresh, which another attack that this time it's a bleed, and it heals you for 12%, so it's half the healing, but it's over 4 seconds. And it has no, as far as I see here, no essence cost. So it's like, boom, you're always going to try and keep, and it's 8-second cooldown, and you're going to keep that up, 12% healing over 4 seconds.
Well,
yeah, and again, go ahead.
I was going to say, you look at Abyssal Strike, which heals 25% with a 15-second cooldown. Then you have Dark Revenge that restores your health by 20%, usable every 30 seconds, but only usable after being critically hit. So depending upon how, the numbers work out in a fight, you can regenerate some health pretty darn quick just, from a few abilities. Throw on top of that Torrential Veins, which amplifies their base health regeneration and amplifies any healing effects that are applied to the Dire Lord by 25%, and also grants essence regeneration.
Yep, for sure. And then, the Druid, they get that buff that increases their healing or whatever, the trait. So,
right.
Do those stack?
Regeneration
Is it going to be broken?
Right. So, if you've got the Dire Lord as the only tank in the group, and you've got a single priest class, having Torrential Veins, constantly being refreshed because it apparently has no, essence cost, you're increasing whatever heals land on you by 25%. So if a shaman's heal is 100 points, it's now 125.
And is your 25% heal from Abyssal Strike now 31.25% heal because you're getting another 25% heal?
Ooh, that's a good point.
Question.
That seems pretty broken.
So again, I see that although the Dire Lord is going to have a much spikier incoming DPS profile, I think all of its abilities are going to help offset that. It's going to require a bit more paying attention.
A bit more not dying.
Yes, if you've got an AFK, somebody like a priest that's going to be more AFK or doesn't really pay a whole lot of attention, you don't want to pair them with a Dire Lord. So
one thing that pops off the screen for me with Dire Lord, obviously every class wants hit points. Hit points, hit points, hit points. But not every class has synergy with hit points. And look at how many abilities they have that are 33% of your total health, or 25% of your total health, or 12% of your total health. This is a class that's going to stack hit points.
And it's going to scale really well. You know, if those numbers are percentages and it's max, the scaling there is amazing.
It seems like a class that's really well fleshed out. Not that the other ones aren't, but like this class has an identity that is loud and clear.
And to me, it's a class that says you're gonna want to focus on gear that is going to add as many hit points as possible. Raw hit points.
Raw hit points.
But guys, it doesn't wear plate armor.
I don't see that as a problem. Again, I look at a lot of these abilities, and I think that those will mostly make up for that raw loss of raw AC. It's going to be lower. But again, we're talking for the most part group level content, and I don't see any of these three tanks having a difficult time dealing with group level content. It's gonna make a difference in raid level, absolutely. You know, the Dire Lord I don't think is gonna be ever gonna be a main tank on a mob that's gonna have a very high melee DPS, kind of like an Avatar of War with quad hits and and enrages and rampages and all that stuff. Group level content, I'd pick a Dire Lord hands down. If the game were released today, a Dire Lord would be my choice for a main tank in a group.
See, I disagree there, just because I think all three tanks are going to be able to tank any content, and I'm hoping that's what the balance they do. As far as like one rampage Avatar War style mob, Dire Lord, yeah, it might take more spiky damage, but the healing over time it's going to be generating to itself, I think it helps even that out. And it's you're going to be getting heals. It's not like I didn't mitigate enough damage on that one hit, I'm dead now. Unless you're getting one shot because you literally can't mitigate enough of it, I think they'll be okay.
I think gear cures all problems in a game like this. I think that the Dire Lord will be more skewed to what Vandrab was saying, that they're probably going to be a little bit more effective in a group. It just kind of looks that way.
And also, what I like about the Dire Lord is that it seems like they have a good skill ceiling. Like, if you're paying attention, you can pull off some amazing shit with their kit.
Yeah, there's going to be some really, like, Purple Club incredible moments with the Dire Lord, for sure.
And they probably have the best single target threat in the game.
Which one is that?
Provoking Phantoms.
Oh, yeah.
Provoke target with terrifying phantoms, increasing their hate towards you over time. So a stacking threat debuff. But as far as we know, there's no like duration. It just lasts forever until it dies, or you swap it, or maybe you can take it off the mob.
Is this like a splurt effect? Splurt from EverQuest, where the dot would do 2, 2, 4, 4, 8, 8, 16, 16. Like, is the threat generated just going to keep ramping up?
That's how I read it, and how, like, in other streams, I believe that's kind of how they described it. So, like, the longer it's on, the more hate it's giving.
Yep.
I can see that as a very good ability when you're in a dungeon and you want to maximize your XP per hour. You pull in 2 at a time. And whatever crowd control, let's say you've got Enchanter, he parks one of them. You're fighting the first guy. Before the first one dies, or just in the early parts of the first fight, the Dire Lord turns, lands Provoking Phantoms on whatever mob is sitting there crowd controlled, and that just keeps ticking over.
Yep.
So when the first mob dies and the second one wakes up, the Dire Lord's got instant full hate on that thing.
Yeah, Warriors and EQ would, like, on a Mez mob, if you were playing really well, you'd pop over to it real quick and hit taunt. And you wouldn't know if your taunt landed, but you'd do it a few times, and the odds were when that mez broke, you would have be at the top of the list. That's an awesome application, potentially, for this ability.
I think there's going to be some balancing, because we talked about how, being able to do so much self-healing so quickly on short cooldowns. I think they'll have to get those numbers right. Otherwise, it'll just be OP and broken, just like flat out.
Yeah.
No doubt.
One thing I think they're kind of lacking, and I think they're in a better spot maybe than Warrior, is AE threat. I mean, they have Splatter, which can hit up to 3 enemies, which is great for threat, and it's on a 15-second cooldown, so it's relatively low. But I don't see any other abilities that are hitting multiple mobs and doing things like that. So it seems like Paladin is the AE king, Warrior's kind of screwed, and then Dire Lord has a little bit of utility for AE.
So I want to bring up something which, when you start looking at the weapons that these classes use, Warrior, any weapon. So you're talking piercing, blunt, slash. You go over to the Paladin, blunt and slash. Dire Lord, slash only. Now, if you remember from several years back, Brad said they're looking into having different weapons, having different damage profiles, depending upon the creature type that you're fighting. So you could face off content like you don't want to use piercing weapons against a skeleton. That weapon would see a decreased damage output. If you switch to a blunt weapon, you actually get an increased damage output versus that creature type. If that actually ends up being true, then the Dire Lord, being limited to edged weapons, could face content where its natural damage output is essentially lower because it cannot bring blunt or piercing weapons to bear.
That's true. That's very true. It might be another pigeonholing thing.
That's a great point. I'd never considered that. Yeah.
Because if you look at much of what the Paladin has, again, you're talking undead stuff. Cannot be stunned by undead. When undead are nearby, flames of celestial light will begin to flicker around the Paladin. And you got blunt weapons. Most undead are, subject to blunt weapons. Your skeletons and that sort of thing. Dire Lord, not so much, because are you really going to be able to bleed a skeleton or bleed a lich or a ghoul? Will they have, the blood pool that a Dire Lord can draw from?
I think that's a nifty gameplay mechanic. Part of me hopes it's not a thing just because I'm lazy and I don't want to have to micromanage, 47 actions per minute if I can do 27.
Right.
But it makes a lot of sense.
And then
again, my thing is I just look at the the different weapon types versus NPC body types and go, hopefully we'll see that. It would be nice.
Did you say map hacks?
I said backpacks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so like backpack space, because if there's all these, certain mobs are taking more or less damage per weapon, do you have to, carry in your bags, especially for warriors? Do you have to carry around piercing, slashing, blunts, just so they're able to do more damage, able to do more threat, and so on.
Yeah, some people love that idea. I just think it's overkill. A topic for another day, perhaps, but it's an important one.
For sure. All right, moving on here. I'm just going to kind of go over general stuff. Do you guys think that each tank class has a specific role or niche?
It's hard to tell. I think that the Dire Lord, and I keep struggling to not say Shadow Knight, the Dire Lord definitely does. I think you could easily argue that the Warrior does. I'm not exactly sure in the spectrum how they all relate to each other, but it looks like they have a good concept right now. it's promising.
Yeah, I agree. Again, just looking at this from a group content point of view, I think that all three of them will perform their primary function equally well, just by different means. So I don't think that they're necessarily going to have a niche. Where that niche will come into play is going to be raid content.
Okay. What about, do you guys feel like the classes can be balanced how they are right now?
Actually, like going over all these skills and abilities with you guys and comparing them, it has given me some more confidence. I see some more connections between the way they're going to do, banners versus group heals versus all the things that Dire Lords do. When your warrior leaves the group, you might be unhappy that you do less DPS, but then the Paladin comes in and suddenly you're tankier. And then the Dire Lord comes in, and of course they're just totally badass on their own. So I think that it's, again, promising. I'm excited for how these three classes are going to play and do similar things well, but differently.
Yeah, it's kind of like playing rock paper scissors here. It's like I can't really pin down one to say, oh, this is gonna be the best one. It's like, oh, this could be good with this. If you had this warrior and this priest, yeah, this will be great. But oh, if you had a dire lord instead, there's all these different combinations of things that go together that to me just doesn't say one stands out over the other.
I agree.
Do you guys think that physical mitigation will lead to the quote-unquote main tank always being a warrior?
If they don't do what I was talking about earlier with the shield, if the shield just becomes the way you mitigate damage, then that's and we've seen abilities, I think, that the Dire Lord has, like to mitigate magical damage, for example. But if I had to guess, yeah, there's probably going to be a warrior main tank simply because they're going to slap on a shield. They're going to have the highest armor class, and they're going to have cool shield abilities that just keep them alive more better.
Well,
More better.
yeah, and I agree that physical mitigation of damage is a better option than things that require a random number generator to go over a certain value. Repost, dodge, parry, those things they're unreliable. Mitigation is always applied, and the one thing that you want if you're facing off new content is what's the most predictable thing in your arsenal, and that's physical mitigation with the highest armor class and probably the highest hit point pool, and
Yeah,
that's probably going to be your warrior.
that seems
Now,
like a safe bet.
yeah, and once you learn the content, you may find, okay, yeah, this was a little bit easier. It took longer to kill. Let's try it next time with a Dire Lord or a Paladin and see what happens. But I think when you're facing off to that new content the first time, you throw the warrior up front.
Yeah, great point. I agree completely.
Plus warrior on warrior, little shield on shield action. But awesome.
I giggled.
So that wraps up the tanks. I just want to switch subjects a little bit and what do you guys think of trees and fronds?
Can we swear on this channel?
Yep.
Fuck trees, fuck fronds, fuck knots on those damn trees. I'm sorry. It just drives me crazy that they put that much effort into a tree. I mean, I get it. An art asset developer programmer is not hampering in any way development of core game mechanics and other tools and that sort of thing. I get it. But as a player who really likes to focus on numbers and game mechanics and gameplay and how this class is going to work and how they interact with each other, these newsletters are not speaking to me.
I mean, you guys know me. I'm the king of the drum beaters of, you got some fancy new idea. There's always an opportunity cost that probably makes it not. Let's nail all the fundamentals. Let's just make the cool game, and then the The bells and whistles can come later if they're even needed. And this does scream bells and whistles. Maybe it's not that big of a deal, but I think there's like a threshold. There's a point where you reach a quality of graphics where you're going to get like, 90% of people, you'll get your foot in the door with them. And then if your game is good, they'll keep playing it. And if a game with better graphics comes out and it's not as good, they're going to play your game still. And it's not going to be because of how many knots are on your frond.
What is great about all of that is, what if they're able to talk about their trees and the bushes and the graphics because they've nailed the fundamentals and it's that far along?
Well, that's great. Wonderful. But we haven't heard anything about the fundamentals in a very, very long time. So we don't have that feedback. It just looks like they're focusing on art assets and that sort of thing. Now, I can understand why they're not giving us a lot of information on mechanics. The minute somebody says this is the way it's going to be, it turns into a shit show on the forums. You've got the people who argue in favor of it, people who argue against it. It goes on for 200 pages and 10,000 views, and Kilson eventually locks the thread because it just devolves into, a terrible, terrible subject. They don't want to be locked into something. They don't want somebody to come back and say, but you said this.
Yep.
I mean, they've already been burned by saying things, so I don't blame them. I just wish they'd do a little bit better job of
Colored
I
mana.
don't. Oh, rip! Please be dead, colored mana. Please be dead. I don't expect them to update. Like, we have some screenshots from streams, and they're quite different because they're balancing skills and abilities all the time. And I don't expect every time they change a variable from a 7 to a 25 that they'd go do it on the website. But the FAQ hasn't been updated in 3 years. The original class reveals haven't been updated, even though there have been 3 pre-alphas since then, and all those skills and abilities on the website. Like, if you go read the website right now, that is not how things are in the game anymore.
That's weird, because all these warrior class previews and paladin class previews, they all just read the website, so it has to be right.
Hypothetically.
The last thing I want to hit on before we end here is, everybody basically in the newsletter and interviews or whatever have hinted at they're being so close, and like, if it actually kind of feels like it to me that we're getting really close to the end of Project Fairtale. What do you guys think?
I think we're suckers and we're leaping at anything to get some hope, and I'm all on board. Fairtale will be out by October. It's going to kick ass. I think we'll probably be disappointed, and then we'll just repeat this process the next time we want to read into something. But right now, the hype train is full steam ahead. Let's go.
I'm not buying any of it. I've been burned now. I mean, okay. We've heard a long time. We're getting closer. Yes, technically speaking, every single day you are getting closer. But I'm at the point now where I'll believe it when I see it.
Definitely. Yep. Well,
You're
I'm on
an
board
adult.
with October. That's what I feel.
Well,
I feel it's October.
I mean, I'm 5.5 years into this game already. I've lost track of them saying, oh, well, this will be coming and this will be coming. Yeah. Okay, fine. I'll believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when I see it.
I think they owe you a blowjob by now.
As long as I get to pick the person, okay.
Yeah, I guess. You don't want Kilson to do it.
Brad.
I don't know. It depends on who I hate most, I guess.
No.
Cute or somebody I hate most? That's a tough choice.
All right. Well, thanks for everyone listening in, tuning in, watching this on YouTube. We'll have more in the future. This was episode 1. I want to thank Vandrad and Kino Monster for coming in here and discussing. Do you guys have any closing words?
Thank you for the
I'd-
invite. I had a really good time. This was a lot of fun, and I look forward to doing more of these in the future.
Yeah, hella fun. And to all 8 people who made it this far, thank you so much.
All right, guys. All right. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.
Peace.